Right, I'm going to make a bit of dough for pizza, and I'm going to make a dough with a 75% hydration. So what that means is for every kg or 1,000 grams of flour, we're using 750 grams of water. Grams and mils is the same with water, so that's a handy thing. The recipe I'm doing is for a smaller batch, so I'm doing something with 400 grams of flour and 300 grams of water. So we start with the water and we zero our scale, and I'll just put water in there and off we go until we get to 300 mils or 300 grams, either way. Here we are. It's a little bit more. It's not super critical. I mean, I like to. I've got OCD, so I like to get things right. Now, normally what I do is I'd like to get the water to a temperature of 25, 26 degrees. So I might just pop this in the microwave for 10 or 15 seconds, and it just warms up a little bit. It's easier for the yeast to get a go. So I'll come back. Right, whilst that's cooking, I'll talk some more gibberish. So what we're going to be doing is we have got the water, we start with the water, then we add the salt, then we add a portion of the flour, and not all of the flour that we're going to use, then we add the yeast, and then finally the rest of the flour. So I'll better check on my water now. And yep, that is a nice temperature. You can measure it with a thermometer if you want to, or you can just, go for it. Anyway, we'll get some salt. I've got here a little tablespoon measure, which is 5 mils, which is near enough to 5 grams. So what I'm using today here is, now, excuse me, I'm just going to check my measurements. I am using right, back again. I'm using a 3% salt, which in this case of the total weight is about 12 grams. So I'll set my scales back to 0. That's 1 scoop. That's 6 grams. Oh, great. We're sort of pretty much there. And that's 12 grams. So about 6 grams in a tablespoon scoop. Now we're just going to whisk that in. Sorry? A teaspoon, sorry, yeah, not a tablespoon, teaspoon. I had just been corrected by pen. So we're just going to make sure we just whisk it in until all the salt has been nicely dissolved. It's all gone. Good. We'll put it back on the scales. And we'll zero it out. Now we've got 400 grams of flour in total, and I normally put in a bit under half. So in this case what I'll do is I'm going to put in 180 grams of the flour at the first stage, and then the other bits, which is the 220, will come towards the end. So I'll measure out about 180 grams. There we go, 180 grams of flour. We're going to give it a pretty good whisk because we want to make sure we've got no lumps in there whatsoever. It's all nice and smooth. Now the way we're going to actually get this dough together is completely by hand. We don't use machines, we don't use rolling pins. We're using a technique that's called a stretch and fold. It's super easy and it's super old, because if you think back in the 1600, 1700, 1800, people didn't have fancy bloody mixers and stuff like that. Yet the bakers of the day still had to knead and bake substantial quantities of dough to feed the people of the village or the city or wherever they were living. and they probably developed this technique because they were stupid. So here we are, this is all nicely mixed in, if you can see that, that's all good. Now we're going to add our yeast, our wild yeast. Normally we would want to use the yeast at the same point of its activity. As I mentioned to you the other day, when you feed yeast it goes up and then it stays there for a while and starts going back down. When it's to the highest point, that's the peak of its activity. And you probably want to use it at the peak of its activity pretty much all the time. So the yeast amount that we're going to use today is, checking again, so the amount of yeast that I'm going to be adding in here is about 25-30 grams. None of these things are really super critical, and it's designed that in about a 24-hour period at about 20 degrees Celsius this bread will be sort of ready to go, or this dough will be ready to go. There'll be two stages. I'm going to be fermenting it overnight, and then later on tomorrow I will be then dividing it up into balls and then letting those ferment for a bit longer. But the bake time is targeted for around about 24 hours from now. So 24 grams of flour, of yeast, sourdough yeast. We're going to add that to it. I'll zero my scales, and I'll normally go a little bit over most of the time, you know, because I want to be on the safe side, because it's hard to slow things down. So let's have a look. There we go. Oh, that's 32. I'm not going to stress about it. That's fine. So we're going to whisk that in because that needs thoroughly mixing up with the rest of this batter, I suppose we could call it. Okay, I think that's well enough incorporated. Now we're going to add the rest of our remaining flour. We're using a total of 400 in this particular instance. We've added 180, so I need to add another 220. I'll zero my scales just to be on the safe side. Here we go. There we go, 220. Oh, 219, we can't have that, for God's sake. Yeah. Okay, we're going to just mix that in with a spoon. And all that we're looking for is that all of the flour is incorporated with the water and the rest of the batter that's there. So we don't want to see any dry flour in the bottom of the bowl or anywhere, in any of those things. So very simple, nothing complicated. There's still some wetness at the bottom and some dry flour there, so I'll just, you know, make sure it's all rocking and rolling. I think that is pretty much it. We don't need to do much more to this. I'll scrape the rest of the spoon with the teaspoon. And now what we're going to do is we're going to cover the dough. I have some convenient handy little Glad handy covers that you can just stretch over it. And just put the dough actually one more time. I'll put it up there so you can see what sort of texture it's got. It's nothing pretty, it's a bit shaggy, but everything is incorporated. That's all we're looking for at this stage. So we'll put the cover on it, and we'll come back in about 15-20 minutes time. Nothing too serious, nothing too critical about that time. Right, that's it for now.